Hello, everybody, and welcome to another social distance learning brought to you by the Liberal Gun Club. Tonight, and I can't resist the pun, is the bench doctor's crowning achievement. He will be showing us how to recrown your barrel. This is currently being streamed out of Zoom to Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook, not to YouTube because reasons. YouTube doesn't like it when we handle guns live. It will be put up on YouTube later by our resident audio video nerd, Paul. So everyone knows, all participants but the moderators and the presenter have their video shut off and are muted. If there are questions, please put them in the Discord Q&A channel or inside the Zoom chat. We have several people watching for questions at the various locations, but the easiest way to get your question answered is to become a member. Sign in directly to the Zoom the next time we do one of these. Becoming a member is inexpensive. Usually it's only $10 a year, or you can spend more if you'd like. And it brings other benefits with it besides these. Feel free to join us in Discord, as mentioned earlier. After this, we have our usual BS session where we all sit around, chat, enjoy each other's company. I've put the link in the Zoom chat. Feel free to click there and join us for a grand old time afterwards. And now on to Scott, the bench doctor.
Hey, well, I'm glad y'all can make it. Today I wanted to show something that people could do themselves. A lot of gunsmiths get requests to do this, and they're going to charge you accordingly. And it's really something that you can do yourself, which is to repair the crown on a barrel. Most often, at least when I've seen them, it's 22s, 22 rifles that are kind of treated like, knock around guns, and they spend a lot of time, getting knocked over in campsites and beat up during hunting trips. And the crown gets damaged over time, or sometimes you'll see rifles and pistols that rust and they'll end up getting pitting. And the problem with that is what will happen is the bullet leaves the barrel, the gas will leave sort of asymmetrically. If there's a gouge or a ding in the barrel, more gas will escape through that than around the actual projectile, creating a wobble or, causing accuracy issues. So what you want to do is make sure that the pressure around the barrel as it escapes is equal all the way around. And the best way to do that is, with crowning tools, and, you can completely recrown the barrel, which means to level it off completely and then get a crowning cutting tool, which I'll show you, and recrown the barrel and then polish it. Or oftentimes, most of the time, you can just polish it yourself. You don't really need to recut the crown. You can just clean it up. And that's something that most people can do at home. You can do any of this at home if you wanted to invest in the tools. But to polish a crown, all it takes is some lapping compound. You can get the stuff at an auto parts store. It's for valve lapping, for basically mating two metal surfaces together so they match. And all it's doing is removing high spots. It's not and sort of polishing the metal. It's not really removing thickness, but it's called lapping compound. And what I have here is 220 grit, but they make it in, you could probably start at 220 and then work your way up to a finer grit if you wanted to. And the way you do it, I made these myself, but you could, these go into a power drill, and you just put the point in the point of the barrel, and you cover this with lapping compound. So I have an old Colt 38 here. It's unloaded. So it goes down in the barrel like that. Let's see if I can get over here like that. And you spin it with a power drill. And brass is a sacrificial metal. Brass will deteriorate before the barrel, before the crown does. But what this will do is use that lapping compound to polish that. So, I have a lathe, so I made my own, and they're of different sizes. You can buy these on Brownells and other sites as well. Or you can just go down to the hardware store and buy some of these brass nuts. You see the round. The thing about them, they don't have the point on them, but that's really not that critical. I just took these and put a bolt in them that matched the thread, and then I put some Loctite in there to keep them in place. And you just put this, chuck this up in your drill and spin it. And you put your lapping compound on there. So you don't really need to invest in a lot of tools to clean up the crown of a barrel. So that's one solution, or something similar to that will work. If you're going to completely redo the crown of a barrel, it's so messed up that the crown is pretty much gone. You could save them by getting a crowning tool. This is a 90-degree tool right here. It's going to cut just a completely flat surface. It's going to take the top of your barrel and completely flatten it. And then once that's done and it's clean, that's the same idea as if you put the barrel of your gun in a lathe and then faced it off. So what you're trying to do is get the cleanest, smoothest possible surface and square and concentric on the end of the barrel that you can. And you would do this if you cut the barrel on a gun. If you were shortening the barrel, you would go through this process of facing the barrel off and then crowning it. And then these are crowning tools here. And this one, I believe, is 45 degrees. Yeah, this is a 45 degree. You can see the taper on it. And this will cut a 45-degree crown just on the very edge of the barrel where the bullet leaves. And this is, I think, 11 and a half or 12. This is an 11-degree crowning tool right here. So this will cut an 11-degree crown. So you can get these in varying degrees. You'll have to decide what you want. And then in the middle of this, these are pilots. So where's my other barrel? Here it is. This is an old Tokarev barrel that I replaced because it looks like a sewer pipe inside. There are no rifling left. So I used it. I'm going to use it for this demonstration. So this is my 90-degree tool. I'm going to resurface this, but this is called a pilot. So what this does is it's milled, it's laid down to the diameter of the inside of the barrel to keep this from wandering and wobbling. You can make them out of brass or steel. This is just made out of a piece of scrap brass I had. I just measured the inside diameter, milled this down or lathed it down. You put it in there and you spin it. You don't want to go too terribly fast. And it just goes clockwise. And as it spins, it grinds the surface, the face of this barrel flat. So at that point, it's prepped, but it's not really crowned yet. And then you would follow up with your crowning tool with the correct pilot in there. And then you would do the same thing here. And that will cut that little tiny crown on the inside. All we're crowning when you're crowning a barrel is this inside edge right here. You're not worried about the outside. If the outside of your barrel's got little nicks and dings in it, that's not going to hurt anything, but it's on this inside edge that's going to give you problems because you're going to create that in the not quite equal gas pressure around the bullet. You see it more with rifle barrels than you do handguns, but it will affect handgun accuracy. So what we're doing is we're squaring this off and cleaning it up, and then we're going to cut just a very slight bevel in there. And then we check it, just visually to make sure that bevel is equal, all the way around, that it's not off center or something like that. If it were, you'd have to recut it. So that's really what crowning a barrel is. And then at that point, you would take your polisher, you'd put that in there and you'd spin it really fast with some lapping compound, and that will remove any burrs or rough areas where you've recrowned it. And you're going to want to do that even if you've just taken a crowning tool to it, because it doesn't leave a mirror smooth finish. So anyway, thought I'd get started. I have a couple of barrels here that I thought I would play with, and I'll show you polishing first, because this is something I think, recrowning may be something that you don't want to take a power drill and cutting tools to the end of your barrel. That could be a little bit daunting, but repolishing is something you could definitely do yourself. And you're not going to hurt anything. You're not. It's not going to go horribly wrong and ruin the barrel. it just won't polish up properly, but it will still work. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera over to a barrel I have chucked up in the vise. You see right here, this is an old 22 barrel that I don't use anymore, but I keep it around for things like this. So this has been squared off. I put this in the mill or the lathe and squared it off. And so I'm going to go ahead and polish it now, polish that inner crown, just this edge right here. And then what I'm going to do later is I'm going to go ahead and go from the start, square off a barrel and recrown it and then polish it and show you it from beginning to end. But this is something that I think most people should feel pretty safe to do at home. I'm going to use one of these because I like the point to keep it stable. And I'm just using a cheap old Craftsman power drill. And tighten it up. So I'm going to take some of this lapping compound. You don't need a whole lot of it. It's kind of like a gritty toothpaste. I just put it on there, apply it liberally. It's going to spin around at quite a speed. Let me get the remainder off. So now this is just going straight down in the top of the barrel. Let's see if I can get you a better angle where you can see. Well, I guess not. But so then I'm just going to, I'm not going to run it at super high speed. And every once in a while, you're going to have to move that compound back around because it wants to push it up that brass piece. Now, if you look carefully, I don't know if you can see it, but you'll see a little bit of brass that is rubbed off on the crown there. That's because we're using brass and it's a sacrificial metal. If you use steel, it's not as likely to do that. It's not going to wear down quite as much. And the barrel is going to be a fairly hard steel, so whatever you're using, I think the barrel will be harder.
Lost your audio, or at least I did.
So
it's because he's running the drill. It's
Yeah.
killing the mic.
Scott, don't talk. Don't talk
sorry.
over the drill. The mic is adjusting for the drill, so then we can't hear you.
Got it. I don't know if you can see it, but now that inside where that crown is like mirror polished. It's really flat. I mean, polished and clean, and it's concentric all the way around. On all of these spots, it's not off center at all. So, and that's something, like I said, we can do it. Once again, you can do this at home. You don't need to spend the money. You don't need fancy tools to make something like this. You just use one of these. I can't remember what they're called, what type of nut that is, but I won't talk. Oops. Any questions about it so far?
None so far,
None.
except the
All
one
right.
I can feel coming through about, can we use a Dremel to do this?
Yeah, it's a little high speed. It's a little harder to keep it, perpendicular, and it's a little less stable. But if you're using a brass nut, it's not going to hurt anything. But you could just take this, put a little bit of lapping compound on it, and I'm not going to talk. Okay. It does exactly the same thing. I just figure, since I do this a lot, I bought tools designated for the job, but this is something you may do twice in your life. But as you can see, it really did clean up that edge, and it smoothed out any burrs. And this works on rust pretty well too. If you just have a little bit of sugar rust or surface rust on there, if you have any pitting and gouging, you're going to want to recrown it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll just recrown this thing real quick and show you how that works. So let's just assume this has been faced off and is square. I'm going to grab, this is a 45-degree crowning tool with a 22 pilot in it. So it fits nice and square in there like that. And then you give it light pressure. You really don't want to push down hard on this thing because the object isn't to remove a whole ton of material. It's just to cut that little thin crown. So put this in here. Oh, and there's also, where's my other piece of this? Here it is. So I have these crowning tools thread into this that goes into the chuck on your drill so you don't chew up these threads, but go ahead and thread that on there. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and recut this. Slide that down in there. Hold your drill nice and level. And I leveled this barrel this way and this way. I wanted to make sure it was perfectly flat before I did this, because if the barrel's curved in the work holding device, you're going to just duplicate that curve on your crown, which is not good. So. All right, I don't know if you can see now, but it recut that. It removed that polished surface and recut that. But you can tell just how little material we're talking about on a crown here. It is maybe a 1/16 of an inch when you're looking at it. But that's all we're trying to do, is create a very uniform concentric surface for that bullet as it's exiting the barrel. And then at that point, that's recutting it with a 45-degree crown, and then we'd polish it, and this barrel would be good to go. Now, at this point, too, I think I would clean this all down with acetone or naphtha or something like that. Remove all of the oil and all of the lapping compound, and then I would get some cold blue and touch that up, because you don't want that to rust again. Cold blue isn't going to hurt the surface of the crown either if you happen to get some on there, but you do want to protect that end of that barrel from the white steel. So no questions up to this point. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to start from scratch on this Tokarev barrel. This thing is horrible. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out of the vise, and I'm just going to show you from beginning to end how to do it. 22 barrel. So now I'm going to chuck this out. I'm going to put this in my vise and level it up. You want this to be pretty rigid. Anytime you're working on something like this, you want your work to be pretty rigid. So I'm going to take my level and make sure that the way it's sitting is level, or as level as I can get it. See, this one needs to be tapped over. Just, where's your hammer, Ed? Let's see. So, all right, now that it's level in there, I'm going to go ahead and cut the entire thing with a 90-degree bevel here, or a 90-degree facing tool.
Before you get started with more noise, if recrowning is done in an improper way, can the barrel grooves be damaged?
Just on the very outside, it's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to hurt much. It at worst, it would damage. Let me see if I can find a bigger barrel to show you. Once again, this gun isn't loaded, but I don't know if you can see the inside of this barrel is pretty crusty. But your lands and grooves come all the way out to the end, and the worst you're going to do is damage the very tip of that, which that's kind of what you're doing when you're recrowning it, is you're kind of cutting that down so it's uniform. You'll see on the grooves it'll look like your crown is messed up on some guns because that's where the grooves are. The grooves are obviously cut, indented a little bit, but you'll see, depending on the gun, 3, 4, 5 little indentations where those grooves are on the crown of a lot of guns. Don't worry about that. As long as it's equal all the way around, it's not going to hurt anything. But the only way I could see you damaging lands and grooves would be as if your pilot damaged something inside. You were using a super hard pilot and it was spinning in there. And but I would think that that would damage the lands more than the grooves. So I'm going to go ahead and chuck this up. And I won't talk. So what I'm going to do is just cut this down, reface it. So this goes in there. Oops, need to tighten it up. Make sure I don't want that to move at all. Okay. I'm not pressing hard at all when I do this. I'm just letting the cutter do the work, just kind of the weight of the drill. Once again, the objective isn't really to remove much material. It's just to clean it up. And you'll see that there's a little bit of machine, marks on the very top of the barrel. You could clean that up with a file if you wanted to, in a sharpening stone. But what happens out on this edge of the barrel doesn't really matter. What's important is this inner edge. So, if you, if it bothers you aesthetically, just take a really fine jeweler's file and you can just polish that and maybe some 1500 grit sandpaper and wet sand that if you wanted a really nice finish. So once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and cut my crown. So at this point now, I got to change the pilots out on these tools and grab so this head just has a little set screw in there. And let's go with an 11.5 or 11 degree. Take that out. Grab my Takara pilot. This is probably the one time in my life I will use a pilot made for a Takara. But now I have it. And tighten that down. Okay, so now it's chucked up and ready to go. Oops. Transfer over my chuck. All right, same thing. I'm just going to put it in there and let the weight of the tool kind of do the work. I'm not going to press hard. See that one? See how wide that? This camera doesn't have the resolution, but I cut a wider crown this time just because it doesn't really need to be terribly wide to work. But so I cut the fresh crown in there. You can see all the steel off to the side. And then we just polish it. It's my big one, my homemade one today. All right. Goober it up. Now, some older, more rusty barrels require a lot more time to polish. You see, I could wobble that drill because the brass, all I'm doing is trying to get as much brass and lapping on the surface of the barrel, and it's not going to remove any material. It's not going to cause any damage because the brass will file away before it will cut into the barrel. Okay. Clean that up. There we go. And let me see if I can hold that up.
I have a question. Well, one of our viewers has a question. How do you determine what angle muzzle crowning cutter to use? I believe you showed 11 degrees and 45 degrees.
Oh, I just try to show, I just try to use whatever was there. I try to match that as much as possible. And thus far, the only two that I've had to cut were 11 and 45 degrees. I'm sure that there's a reference guide somewhere, maybe in one of my older books will tell you what the crown was. But honestly, I can't answer that to say like, oh, if it's a rifle 30 cal, use this, or if it's a 9mm pistol, use that. I would have to research that or call the manufacturer and find out what's best. So sorry, I can't give you a definitive answer. Anyway, but now if you can see a little bit still of the lapping compound goobered up on there. And then you can see how this edge has the machining marks in it that need to be filed off, but that's been crowned and polished. So then you, like I said, you take a little file. This is probably a little too rough, and you would just file those machine marks out of there and then polish it with some polishing compound. Something like that. So it's a pretty straightforward process. And it's something that I would definitely recommend you do for yourself if you don't need to recrown it, if that's more than you want to take on. I think each one of these crowning tools is about $50, and then each pilot is like 10 or 12. But I just make my own because I fortunately can. So you would want to pick up whatever degree of crown you want and the pilot for whatever gun you're going to use. 22 is really handy to have because, like I said, for whatever reason, 22 barrels just get beat up. I think because the guns don't have a lot of value and they get used a lot, knocked around. A lot of kids shoot them, and so they get pretty chowdery. But and hunting rifles quite a bit because they spend a lot of time outdoors, in moisture and things like that. And, a lot of guys clean their guns after being out in the rain, but they don't necessarily pay that much attention to the crown. But you can polish these yourself. You can clean them up yourself. And I would give this a try first. I would try polishing, a damaged crown and see if that helps. You're not going to hurt anything. You're not going to do any damage. And then at that point, determine if it needs to be recrowned, take it into a gunsmith. Some of the things you want to be careful of, though, let me grab this 22 barrel.
Before you move on to that, though, Scott, you just mentioned needing to bring your barrel in to be recrowned by a gunsmith. How do you know if your barrel needs to be recrowned?
Well, if you're otherwise super accurate barrel all of a sudden now is wildly inaccurate, or it has degraded in accuracy over time, and there's you've determined that there's nothing else going on, no erosion or something like that, or you can just look at it and see that the crown is messed up. You try to polish it, but there's still a deep gouge or a nick in it, or some sort of damage to the crown of the barrel. You would take it into a gunsmith and have them do that, or send me a PM and I'll give you the list of tools that you need to do it yourself. Some of the things you want to consider, though, is looking at the barrel. You can see that I have a sight on here. So, if your sight is running right into the barrel of the gun, you're going to want, or the tip of the muzzle here, you're going to want to be careful. You can only recrown this so far back without having to retap and drill drill and tap for this site again. So, kind of look out for things like that. And if that's the case, take it to a gunsmith. You really don't want to drill and tap a barrel because you've got to get this exactly perpendicular right here and line it up with the rear sights. So that's not something that I recommend you try. But so that's just something you want to pay attention to, any kind of muzzle device that goes on there. And also on a threaded barrel, you're going to be careful there because it's not the easiest thing to recrown. But normally the threaded barrels are recessed quite a bit. The crown is recessed in quite a bit, so it's they're not likely as to get us chewed up. Plus, most people run a muzzle device that protects it as well. But the rethreading a barrel is a different story altogether. That's not something I suggest you do by hand. Any other questions? I see Romulus on there. Hey, buddy, how you doing?
I know there are no other questions at the moment.
Okay, well, it's short, but I think that's pretty much pretty much it. It's a pretty straightforward thing to do, and I certainly wouldn't hesitate to do it if you're at all on the fence or you have an old 22 that is pretty chewed up. You'd be surprised how much the crown affects the accuracy of a gun. And, like I said, all these tools are definitely available. I'm not, I don't know how many people really need to go out and buy recrowning tools because it may be something you do once or twice in your life, but polishing is certainly very straightforward and easy to do.
There is one thing that John pointed out. A link that I threw in the participant chat on Zoom for renting your own crowning tools.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you could. Yeah, they rent reamers and all kinds of things. Yeah, I'm sure you could rent one or just hit me up and I can loan you some. Just throw them in the mail and as long as you promise to return them.
There's another interesting question in chat. If you're shooting at, say, short distances, 5, 10, 15 yards, but quickly, that's different than shooting 600 yards with a precision rifle. How much inaccuracy can a crown barrel cause at 100 yards, for example? Like, what are you looking at for degradation?
You're looking at your groups getting wider. You've got a rifle that shot one MOA at 100 yards consistently, and now it's creeping out. It's 1.5 2 inches. You'll see your groups it's not going to cause your bullets to start, hitting sideways or tumbling or anything like that. It's just going to cause the accuracy to degrade. Your like I said, your former 1 MOA gun is now a 2 MOA gun and getting worse. And you've looked at the optics, you've checked everything, and there's nothing else going on. But you see some wear and tear on the muzzle. It's not going to hurt you to polish that up or even recrown it. And it's not going to change the value of the gun at all. It's removing so little material that it's hardly noticeable, especially if you just touch up the barrel with some bluing, cold bluing or something and just blend it in. But you generally see a loss in accuracy. And I don't know how much it's going to affect, say, a 9mm Glock at 10 yards. I doubt you'd probably notice much, but I'm sure if you were shooting it out to 20 yards, that might give it enough time to manifest itself, where the bullet's starting to yaw a little bit or something.
Excellent. I don't see any other questions, but I'm going to give it a few more seconds in case anyone has some last minute questions they can think of.
Yeah, nice and short and sweet. It's a pretty straightforward thing to do, but I thought it would be nice to show people. I like showing people things that they can do themselves rather than pay somebody $50 and have their gun tied up for 2 weeks waiting for the guy to get to it.
2 weeks is optimistic for everything that I've seen. So,
yeah.
And it might not necessarily be a guy.
Oh, this is true. You can see here on this you can see where it kind of wore away a little bit of the brass. There's not a ridge there, but it's really polished it. That's where the lapping compound was doing its job. So it does work, and it does help.
Okay. Well, I am going to stop the stream. Well, actually, nope. There's one other question here. I almost jumped the gun. Actually, it looks like a couple. Let's go with the last one first. What are some things that can damage a crown on a barrel?
Oh, just dropping it, like barrel down on a concrete or a rock, or somebody cleaning with the improper tools, like with a steel guide rod or something like that, or you could damage it like trying to knock a squib out. I've seen people grab steel rods and pound them down into the barrel. Not only can that damage your crown, but it can also damage the lands and grooves. So use brass. If you're going to put anything down the barrel of a gun, use brass or aluminum, something soft. Rust is another big one. And a lot of times it's just improper tool handling. People will do really dumb things and try to maybe polish, smooth out the face of the barrel with a file and gouge the hell out of the crown. I don't think people really appreciate how much the crown contributes to accuracy. But I think mostly just banging it against, rocks and dirt and things like that, dropping them.
It appears Brownells has 600 and 800 grit lapping compound. Other stuff I see online is 240. Is it best to go for the finest we can find?
Depends on what you're doing. If like here, since I'm trying to grind out machine marks from the tooling, I go with the 220, and then I go with like 600 or 800, and follow it up with a finer compound to give it a really good polish. That was what I do to somebody else's gun. To my guns, I just use what I've got and polish it. The polish is not as important as just removing the gouges and dents. But I would start with a coarse and then work my way up to a fine. But I don't think the difference between a 600 and 800 is going to be perceptible to most people, unless it's under a microscope. And I would avoid hand sanding stuff because you're going to be putting the temptation sometimes is to take a piece of sandpaper and, file down or smooth out the edge of your barrel. And you end up creating, you're not keeping it completely flush. And so you'll end up creating divots and, a less than ideal surface doing that. So if you're going to do that, get a file and mount your barrel in a vise or something and make sure your file is moving level and smooth across the surface. You don't want to be coming at it at an angle or hand sanding. I've seen guys hand sand, try to do valves and pistons that way, and it just ruins them. Uneven pressure. It's amazing what a few tenths of a thousandths will do to some things.